speaking of a team with no advantage, the Chicago Bulls, right? Zach LaVine has had a foot surgery. He's going to be out 4 to 6 months. His name has been in the rumor mill pretty much for the past year and a half. And it seems like the Bulls gave him a max contract, but they really didn't want to. Mm-hmm. And now it seems like the Bulls are trying to get out of the Zach LaVine business. But because he's now having a surgery on his foot, side note, I don't know why we trust the Chicago Bulls medical staff, considering some of their movies. If you don't know them, go look them up. But rumors were, and I don't know how strong they were for you, I'd heard both sides, that there was considerable interest between the Bulls and the Pistons in getting a deal done, and maybe that the output wasn't going to be as drastic as the Bulls would probably expect for someone of Zach LaVine's caliber, probably because of the remaining time on his contract. Did you get the feeling that there was any deal that was going to be consummated before LaVine and the Bulls and Clutch decided to end his season and send him under the knife?
I don't have like a scale of 1 to 10 or like a football field exact barometer of like they were on the 5-yard line, but I do think I do think the deal got past the 50-yard line. Like I do think there was legitimate interest on both sides. I've heard several iterations of talks of like players the Pistons weren't willing to put in, players they were, players that Chicago was going after. So it does seem like there was actual real talks that were being had. But yeah, to really put a handicap on how close it was or what the likelihood it was going to be happening before Thursday, I didn't have enough information to really pin that down. But also because I didn't necessarily think it was something that Detroit was like super gung-ho about. That's always kind of been the sense I've gotten about him for them. And I think as evidenced by the fact that Detroit has kind of been, and you probably know better than me, they've kind of been more like, we'll see what happens, right? As opposed to like a team that's going out there with direct initiatives, trying to add talent, trying to sell. Like the Pistons kind of seem to be playing the middle. They're like a last remaining member of a reality show house, and they have to pick a side. There's two alliances, the buyers and the sellers. It seems like they've been playing both all along. Like I believe it was James Edwards' latest article came out today before we started reporting that, the Pistons are still leaning towards keeping Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks, which they've been saying, all along. So and the last time I talked to someone with the Pistons, he said to me something to the effect of like, look, we're the worst team in the league. We have to be exploring all options. That'd be ridiculous for us not to. So I don't know how serious this would have actually been, as opposed to also, it's not like the Bulls had a ton of options out there. And the fact that they seem to have one actual fish on the line, it might have even been more of Chicago trying to reel that fish in as opposed to both sides trying to get something done. That's kind of my understanding.
Well, I was always wondering if they were going to get some type of deal done, would the Bulls have to put first-round draft picks in it? And in this iteration of their front office, they have sent out a lot of first-round draft picks. They sent out first-round draft picks for Nikola Vucevic. Did they send out draft picks for Lonzo Ball in exchange? Or was that just
I don't remember, but I definitely know off the top of mind they sent out a first and 2 seconds in the sign and trade that brought DeMar from San Antonio.
So yeah, they send them out, and now they've reached sort of this, I won't say inflection point, but they're 23-27 after 50 games. Last year's record, Jake, after 50 games, 23-27. So a lot of what we've heard, and I think what happens with a player like Zach is you look at the number, and not the number as in his production, but you look at his contract, and you forget that there's a player behind that. And you're saying, okay, if it didn't work with him in Chicago, then somehow the player is devalued. No.
Yeah.
I think, Jake, that this is a guy that in the right situation, if he's your third option on, attacking closeouts, and he can carry an offense for a period of time, like we've seen him have 50-point games, like he can go on heaters, like I think that's fine. And in today's future economic climate of the NBA, where we just saw the salary cap numbers for next season, the cap and tax numbers, they weren't as high as people expected, but it was maybe $1 million like less than what the projections were. But you're going to see more $40, $50 million contracts. Like that's going to look like the norm. in the future. And then so Zach's contract will look less onerous because after this year, he's got 2 and a player option, which he surely will take and as he should take. So there's that. I just think sometimes we get so wrapped up in how much money a player is making, which you have to in a salary cap and tax world. But you actually have to ask yourself the question like, hey, can this player do something for us? If you're the Bulls and you have to give up draft picks to get rid of Zach LaVine, to me, that says more about the organization than it does the player. That's just me. Now,
I would agree. And like the Bulls, they were shopping him around the league. Like they called Atlanta about DeJounte Murray, doing a swap there. They called Houston for something, I believe, around Jalen Green, and don't think the Rockets really wanted to upgrade Jalen Green with the mind of getting someone who is, in theory, a $50 million version of Jalen Green right now. So it's difficult. That combination of the salary, the injury history, and the fact that he has never been proven capable of driving winning as a primary option of an offense or a defense, I think that's going to be very difficult for the Bulls to move him with all that, ever on the length of this contract, considering the fact that he's undergoing another season-ending, or not another, but I mean, yeah, his ACL injury was a season-ending surgery way back when. Like he had knee stuff, but when he was an All-Star, that he came back to play in the All-Star game, and then there was long-term injuries there. So I just honestly, like, we're recording this February 5th, 2024. If Zach LaVine is still in Chicago February 5th, 2027, like, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, the Sixers were never able to move Tobias Harris. The Hornets were never able to move Gordon Hayward. Maybe they will upcoming, but this is the type of deal and the type of player and the type of injury history that I am genuinely concerned, for lack of a better word, that Chicago will honestly ever be able to find a trade for him unless they are, to your point, attaching draft capital to help him get out the door. Or a Patrick Williams or a Kobe White or something to that degree.
Right. Well, the one thing I will say, because we're going to move on to Phoenix, the ACL one, I think, was the biggest question mark for me. And granted, he was a much younger player when he suffered the ACL. But to me, the fact that he came back from that and then and went on an upward trajectory, I have fewer concerns about this surgery than I would have had 7 or 8 years ago. Now, granted, there's more miles on his body and everything else, and a couple of more procedures like the cleanups and everything else, and sooner or later it's going to take its toll. I don't know if it's going to take its toll throughout the life of this contract. I don't think he's going to turn into Blake Griffin. You know what I mean? I don't think he's going to turn into Blake Griffin on a Supermax deal where, boom, he gives his leg for a franchise and then he's done after that. Like, I don't see that happening. I don't think the bill is going to come on Zach LaVine's body this soon in particular. But
yeah,
we got actual basketball to talk about.
Yeah,
What's that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's just the prospect of another team like accepting that risk.
Yeah,
that's all.
It's definitely a risk. And that's why the Bulls, considering the things that they've said privately, you may have to attach draft capital because you've poisoned the water on your own player.
Yeah.
Funny how that happens.